Yemen, just one of the flashpoints in this part of the world, blazing red. Iran and Pakistan now trading fire. And with the war in Gaza raging, tensions between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon grow, while militants attack U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq.
The Department of Homeland Security has announced the arrest of 2 Yemeni nationals, both failing on their separate attempts to sneak into the United States.
So there was a Yemeni, for example, who they caught. The FBI, we did our thing, we deported, but he came back and they caught him again. But this time, they just cut him loose. Okay. And we don't know whatever happened to that guy. And that's the kind of thing that would never in a million years have happened just a few years ago. It never would have happened, something like that. And there are other cases, just weird releases of people on the FBI watch list, screw-ups like that. And I think that with the numbers that are coming through and the numbers that are terrorists on the FBI watch list, suspected terrorists, the threat is elevated. And I think the bad guys know about it. And the reason I say the bad guys know about it is because we had the benefit of a major FBI investigation and prosecution out of Ohio recently, just wrapped up in April of 2023. Guy's name is Shihab Ahmed Shihab.
According to a search warrant obtained by CBS News, Ahmed Shihab, accompanied by an FBI informant, recently traveled to President Bush's home in Dallas, Texas. Prosecutors say Shihab, who claimed to have connections at the highest levels of ISIS, wanted to kill Mr. Bush because he broke up the country with many Iraqis dying. Shihab, who was living in Columbus, Ohio, was being investigated for smuggling people across the Mexican border and into the United States.
Where's he from?
He's an Iraqi. He came here he overstayed his tourist visa and applied for asylum and immediately set about trying to import his old buddies from ISIS over through Brazil, through the Darien
I'm
Gap.
familiar with the case,
over the southern border, and he got caught, thank God. But during the investigation, he talked about, I have experience with this. I just brought 2 Hezbollah guys over. There's no more in the court record beyond that, but that we know that Hezbollah would also understand that this is a prime time to bring people over. I've met Lebanese. Lebanese are part of it. They're coming over. Venezuelan Lebanese descent are coming over. We know that as well. People from Nicaragua are flooding the border. People from Venezuela are flooding the border. All of this is just insane. I mean, in my time, we would just be sphincters tightened up all over the place right now. I think Hezbollah is the most dangerous U.S. designated terrorist group in the world.
Welcome to the Border Wars podcast, the #1 podcast in all of the Americas, the only bilingual podcast that takes you beyond the border. So we are in Austin, Texas, and we had to go to Austin for many reasons, but no more important reason than my current guest. And this is someone that if you watch some of our other videos, not our podcast, but webinars, we've had Todd Bensman on with us before, but Todd asked me he wanted to go on the podcast. I said, no, Todd, we're not going to do a virtual. I'm going to come down to Texas because we got to do this in person. And I think single-handedly, Todd, you're one of probably the foremost experts on the border crisis. You've written 2 books. We're going to talk about that, but you're pretty much, making now a name as a prominent expert on understanding various dimensions of the border crisis, from terrorism, criminality, capacity issues, to just the bad policies that have led to this issue. Todd, first of all, it's great to have you here. I'm glad to be in Austin. This is your town.
That's right. I live here. The best thing is that I didn't have to drive that far to get here.
There you go.
No, plus it's an honor to be here.
No, it's an honor for us to have you. You have a very distinguished career, and I want to get into that a little bit because I think the best way I describe it is you have kind of like a dual hat. You were a journalist for a long time. You kind of still, in so many ways, are still doing journalistic work. I consider it more now research. I think an expert now. But you cut your teeth as a journalist, but you also spent time as an intelligence analyst, intelligence manager for the Texas Department of Public Safety, focused specifically on counterterrorism. Take us a little bit through that journey. How did it begin for you? What made you want to be a journalist? And then after you were done, I don't want to say you're done, but after the journalism career, what made you want to go into counterterrorism?
I think as a young man, I read too many Jack London books and Ernie Pyle and all those great guys.
Tom Clancy wasn't around yet.
No, but I'm dating myself here, but I just was attracted by the romance of journalism, and back in the days when I was going to college, trying to figure out what I'm going to do.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I have my undergraduate from Northern Arizona University, and I think when I was like a freshman or something, the movie The Killing Fields came out, and it was about this, Sidney Schonberg and the Cambodian genocide. And how, his fixer got caught up in it. And then I must have seen that 6 times. I said, I'm going to do what that guy is doing. That's really, that movie just killed it for me.
And you saw that before college?
I think I was probably a freshman or something, trying to figure out what I'm going to major in. I was like, anyway, so, then Ernest Hemingway, of course, I was cut my teeth on his reporting from the Spanish Civil War and World War II and all the rest of that. And I was like, I got to be one of those guys. So, I got my degree in journalism, and within a few years, I was trying to do what those guys did. I was, covered the Gulf War as a freelancer.
Did you go to Kuwait?
I ended up in Israel and then Jordan, trying to get over to Baghdad during that. And I was in Amman when the war ended. I was like, what, 6 weeks?
Yeah, exactly. You thought you had maybe a few months to do this, and then the war was done.
Right. So, but, I was in 6 or 7 Scud missile attacks and, covered them, and I did get published, and then came back to Israel after that and covered the Intifada, the first one, a little bit, the end of it, really. And then ended up back in the States, and then back in Eastern Europe when the wall came down. Covered the war in Bosnia for about a year.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, I was trying to realize the dream. And
so you started kind of covering international conflicts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, before you started doing anything domestic.
Now, my first time out of the country was to cover the Gulf War. I'd never even used my passport once.
Oh, wow.
I get on El Al, get off, and they hand me a gas mask. It's my first time out of the country, and they said, welcome to Israel. Yeah. Here's your gas mask.
There you go.
Which I lost about 2 days later or whatever. So anyway, not that I needed it, but you didn't know at that time. After a few years in Eastern Europe, I ended up with a job, full-time staff. I was able to kind of parlay all of that into a job with a Big Ten newspaper. That's how I ended up in Texas. Dallas Morning News.
Are you from Arizona?
I was born in Texas, but grew up in Arizona. And then I was, after graduation, I traveled. I didn't really go back to Arizona. Ended up in Texas, Dallas Morning News, staff writer there for 10 years. Did a lot of foreign reporting, managed to persuade them to, because when I was overseas as a freelancer, I was shoestring, just on my own. Like I funded my own,
operation,
operation, kind of like with a backpack and hitchhiking through war zones and that kind of thing. Bumming hotels and rides and whatever, sometimes camping outdoors in ruins.
Wow.
But, I published a lot. I covered the siege of Sarajevo for
And would you just publish like everywhere? Any place that would pitch?
I had 6 or 7 papers that were my regulars in the States. I was based down there. I lived in Zagreb for a while, and then because that's where the airlift into Sarajevo. If you were a reporter, you could get into Sarajevo on the airlift, and then they moved the airlift to Split, Croatia, and so then I moved with it, and then just kind of kept going with that. There was a time I covered the war in Moldova.
Oh, really?
But never actually got a piece published because I couldn't get communications out. I was on the Russian side of that. Anyway, so I got conflict coverage experience, and then I parlayed that into a...
so did the Dallas Morning News hire you because of your international experience?
Totally.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I walked in there with this portfolio of and the war was still going on actually in 94 when I went there, and then they just put me on the cops beat.
Okay.
So
makes sense.
I was just covering cops for about a year, night cops, homicides and all that. But, you become a good reporter doing that.
Yeah.
But ultimately I was there for a long time, years. And I was assigned to the FBI to cover the FBI.
Okay. Is that how you made your connections into the world of law enforcement and CT?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Because at that time when I was assigned, there was a major investigation going on with Hamas front groups in Dallas.
Oh, really?
Right. And
is this tied to what was now the Holy Land Foundation?
It was the Holy Land Foundation.
There you go.
Yeah. I ended up getting sued by them.
Okay.
I was one of 5 reporters that they sued to shut us down. But then 9/11 happened, and I was covering the FBI, and because of that, a lot of people don't realize that the epicenter of the 9/11 and counterterrorism investigation was Dallas, because American Airlines was headquartered there, and its planes were and everything was happening there. Who were the hijackers? Who are they? It was all happening in Dallas. All my people, all my sources, obviously. Can
I ask you one thing real quick?
Yeah.
How did you react to 9/11? Being now kind of on the beat, covering foreign wars, having been in the Middle East, what was your initial gut reaction to this?
It seemed clear to me that this would be an Islamic terror attack, but I remember that morning telling my wife that, everything has changed now. Everything. And I wasn't the only one. Other people remember it. Like, it was obvious that the world was just going to change. My career was going to change. Everything was going to change. And it did. I never covered anything else but terrorism again. Wow. Islamic terrorism for the remainder of my career.
Yeah. Till today.
Yeah. So, the Holy Land Foundation, and of course, the FBI was knocking down, rolling up terrorists in Dallas for the whole rest of the time I lived there. We had a lot of problems in Dallas. Immigration courts, we were using immigration law.
Yeah.
And I was covering immigration proceedings against these guys because they decided not to do criminal cases, but to get them out of the country sooner by deporting them.
I remember this.
I covered tons of those things. These guys were coming in there, and the government was presenting terrorism evidence on them. And it was just like,
So did they recruit you into the Texas Department of Public Safety, or did you kind of do that on your own initiative?
I was recruited in there years later. I mean, in 2006, I took a job with the San Antonio Express News, which is a Hearst publication, as an investigative reporter. And it's basically, the job was, what do I do? And they said, well, just win us some awards. And
make us look good.
Yeah. And they said, you can do whatever you want. Just pick whatever you want to do. And so when I got down to San Antonio, I looked around, it was 2006. And I'm like, what's the sexiest story going on down here? And it was the Calderon War against the cartels.
I was picking up right around that, I think 2006.
Yeah, it was tearing it up down there. And Hearst News considered, out of San Antonio, that was kind of like their their base for border coverage. So I'm a gringo, no Spanish, but I'm like, I'm doing that story.
Okay.
And we had other reporters that were doing that, but I didn't think they were doing a very good job of it. So I just took it. And probably for 3 years, I covered the war in Mexico. That's when I got my first taste of border.
Border, yeah.
And I loved it. There's still no sexier story anywhere than that thing. Traveled all over interior Mexico doing stories, covered like big, long series. I did a series on gun running. I did a multi-part series on asylum seekers coming out of Mexico, cops getting shot to full of holes. And
so let me just pause you right there, because I get it, but I want to make sure our audience kind of understands, like, what makes the border so attractive? Like, why is it like the sexiest story? I had somebody once tell me, like, I'm going to the border. I'm here in Texas, and they said, is it border porn? And I was like, it's like
border porn.
Yeah.
There's something to that, because for one thing, there's violence.
That's true.
Which is just astoundingly terrible. There's money. There's cops chasing bad guys all over the place. There's intelligence agencies, our guys on the other side doing secret squirrel stuff.
Yeah.
There's Mexican corruption. There are regular just human interest stories of Americans who live and work on both sides that got caught up.
There's humanitarian issues.
There's humanitarian issues. There's these human stories that were just incredible stories. I mean, everywhere you look, you go down to the border then or now and kick over any rock, and there's something squiggling under there.
There's a story.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, really everything that you can imagine.
So in many ways,
human drama.
You're never shortage of stories or interesting things to study or to tell, as opposed to maybe you're covering before where you're covering the law enforcement beat in Dallas or something like that, where there's murders, there's homicides, but it's also like traffic cops and, going after, simple everyday crime.
Right.
But I could see that. Yeah.
But here's the thing is, because of my years in Dallas, and, we would hear all the time, I was in the counterterrorism world of, the intelligence guys, the FBI guys that sourced up all over the place. And, I used to hear while I was in Dallas, hey, there are Arabs crossing the border. There are terrorists crossing that border. And I never could, when I was in Dallas, I couldn't get my hands around that. That was a sexy story when I heard it as a tip, but I couldn't get people, if you dug in a little bit on that.
Because you're covering the court cases at that time, right?
Court cases and investigations.
You're not going to the border.
I wasn't going to the border yet, not up there. And so I decided I'm going to finally go down there and try to dig on that.
What was the first border city that you started to dig into?
Laredo. Probably
Yeah.
Laredo. But I was all over that border. And all over Mexico, with a translator and a photographer usually, or my photographer sometimes was the translator, because I'm a gringo, man. I mean, it's the worst, but it's like, remember, I'd been all over the world already not speaking local languages.
Yeah. So you used to working with translators?
Always.
Yeah.
Had translators. So to me, Mexico is just one more country that I needed a translator in.
Yeah.
No big deal. So I went down there and I wanted to find out, is that Arab things coming over the border? Is that a true thing? And before too long, I was neck deep in that.
Yeah.
And I ended up doing a 5-part series on special interest aliens.
Oh, that was back then?
That was the first time that I'd ever.
What time frame are we talking about?
2007.
Wow. When did the SIA term get developed?
2004.
Okay.
So just a few years, that whole thing had been in place.
Was it a classified program, or was it?
Parts of it were classified.
Because the term wasn't really known back then.
Nobody had ever heard of this. Yeah. I had never heard of it. But then before too long, there were people that from my federal sourcing, for my federal days, that I was able to get a hold of, people endorse you as a trustworthy guy. Yeah. And before long, you're actually talking to the secret squirrel guys that are in the middle of this.
Okay, good deal.
ICE guys. ICE, and I'm not sure if they had HSI, but yeah.
Is SIAs, and we'll unpack that term for those that aren't familiar with it. But you think does that become a lexicon around the same time that ICE is developed? Is that kind of like an ICE term?
It's a CBP term, but it was developed by the intelligence community.
Okay.
For CBP.
Okay.
It was a CBP program started in 2004.
That's Customs and Border Patrol. Right?
Yeah. But the entire intelligence community was deeply involved in this thing. And that was all secret stuff.
Yeah. So this is kind of part of the global war on terror, what it used to be called back in the day. You know?
Yeah, because they were expecting more follow-on attacks, and they assumed that the border would be like, we would think of that. They would think of that. Who wouldn't do that?
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So they stood up programs. I ended up traveling, finding Iraqis crossing.
Okay.
Lots of Iraqis were crossing. I interviewed like 6 different immigration lawyers. That's how I got at that story. And I asked each one of them, what do you got from the Middle East? And they all had, 15 people different from Pakistan. I'm like, what? This has never been reported before. So I convinced the paper to let me travel to Syria. That was my first time to Syria, Jordan. I'd been to Jordan before. Tracking how Iraqis were making their way. I tracked their trails all the way around through Panama, Darien Gap.
Were they doing Darien Gap back then?
Yeah. That was the first time I wrote all about the Darien Gap.
Oh, okay.
And then up through Guatemala. I went to Guatemala. I went to Nicaragua. I tracked. I interviewed. I found people that were. I was really just tracing this one Iraqi story and confirming it all the way along. And in a 5-part series on special interest aliens, which won a National Press Club award for foreign correspondence at the time. Nobody thought it was too crazy.
Is this for that San Antonio paper?
Yeah. Won a National Press Club award for the gun smuggling piece too. And everything about the border was just, great professionally. And then those stories, especially that one, caught the attention of a lot of intelligence community types, FBI types, and including the freshly appointed head of Department of Public Safety.
When was that created? When was the Texas Department of Public Safety?
Oh, that's been around forever. It's a huge. That's been around. The Texas Rangers have been are part of that. It's a $1 billion agency, massive.
I think what a lot of times people don't realize is that the size of Texas, right, is like a country essentially, because you guys have a GDP that's, I don't know what the number is, but it's big. Your trade relationship with Mexico is like literally international trade. It's the hub of U.S. trade with Mexico, which is our largest trade partner. And Texas, I think, necessitates and has a national security infrastructure almost at the level of a country.
That's right. And it's well funded. They had, at that time, one of the biggest fusion centers. Fusion centers was a post 9/11 construct.
The all source fusion centers, right? Yeah.
Right. FBI, ICE, all the feds, state, locals, everybody all under one roof so that they could share in a way that they weren't before 9/11, which caused 9/11. This was seen as the solution. And so after those stories came out, there just came a time where it just worked out that when I got the call, hey, do you want to do intel? I was like, well, what's the job? Well, you're going to do terrorism stuff. We need somebody who's got we're looking for unconventional people with unconventional backgrounds.
Okay.
Which I guess I qualified.
No, I would say you qualified.
Anyway, so I said, yeah. And first they were wondering, can you pass a background check and security check? Cause not all journalists are all, that clean really. But yeah, of course. And so, I went there, did the background.
Is the clearance that the Texas Department of Public Safety use the same as federal clearances?
No. I had to do a separate federal clearance, where they brought the people in and they're doing,
So you can access a skiff from a federal law enforcement.
Oh yeah, we had one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're able to access classified information at the national level, but also connect that to what you're doing at the state level.
Yeah, I had federal clearance through DHS.
Okay.
Because you can't do that job unless you can you can't share anything with anybody if you don't have your clearance. And I did that for another 9 years, to almost 10 years. So I gave up journalism and just sort of disappeared, but had many incredible experiences doing that work.
Can you give us a few of them? Just give us, that you can't share.
Well, for one thing, after a few years, they gave me my own unit, and they said, create something here that is going to help the IC, help the FBI's, because we had our own proprietary databases from just being cops on the street. We have a very diverse, ethnically and religiously population in Texas with a lot of terrorism. A lot of terrorism cases. I knew that from, the
journalist days. Yeah.
Yeah. And you would be surprised what we have. And all the agencies want what we have, but somebody has to be there to traffic cop it.
So you guys have basically the local information, which oftentimes in a enterprise such as the IC, the intelligence community, is the best way to validate what you might think may be happening nationally, right? To get on the ground and see what's happening locally.
That's a good way to put it. And one thing about the job was that it was terrorism. It was Islamic terrorism, and it was about those people that we know of. DPS isn't just cops, highway patrol. We had CID who had snitches all over the place. And I was in the intelligence and counterterrorism division, and we had people that were just dedicated to working our informants, who often had not just criminal information for the case, but they had information overseas. They had stuff that was of use that we wouldn't have used in a criminal case, but had to be extracted and packaged for our partners. And it worked all different ways.
Is there a notable case that you could talk about of a known jihadist group?
Well, probably the best way to put that is that, we were frequently brought into active FBI counterterrorism cases.
Okay.
Where we did social media extraction. There were things that we could do that they couldn't do, or just needed extra bandwidth. And so we were brought into cases. We worked terrorism cases, investigations as they were going with the agents, the FBI agents, frequently. We also initiated collection programs that were unique. For example, there came a time, I think it was like 2010, 2011, when none of we have 6 FBI offices here in Texas, field offices, and none of them had informants in the Somali communities.
Okay.
So I concocted a strategy to create informants in the Somali communities that we had around here, which I'm not going to go. I can't.
Of course,
go into that one, but we did things that ended up with Somalis busted and on our charges, and then like, hey, we've got a job for you if you want to get out of this thing, that kind of thing.
Of course.
Very successful. One of the big programs that I spearheaded was back to the special interest aliens, because we had the border, and we had what we called JOICs, which is Joint Operation Information Centers, 7 of them all along the border. run by the Rangers, Texas Rangers, and we had intel working out of those things. And we had these people, even though the broader world said it was like some kind of a conspiracy theory or something, that there weren't really any of these people crossing, even though I wrote a 5-part series about it.
Of course, yeah.
Let
me ask you, not to backtrack, but was that the first journalistic piece on SIAs?
It was one of them. I think the Associated Press actually did a really good one. Yeah. It didn't get much attention, but I cited the heck out of it, and they did good work. I interviewed one of the 2 reporters who was on that.
And back then, with the SIAs was what, in the dozens, maybe 100?
No, we would have probably 3,000 or 4,000 a year cross.
Was that right? It was that high, even back in 2007. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's always like a steady several thousand.
Okay. Per year.
And terrorists. Yeah. Who were watch listed then, just like they are now. We talk about it openly here now, but in those days, my job was, the governor. It was Governor Perry and then Abbott later, but what would happen is there'd be a big report, terrorists crossed, and it would fall to me, and they needed to know right now whether there was any truth to this. The media was knocking down their doors. Mm-hmm. The state legislators were knocking down the doors. What's going on?
So you would go brief the governor?
My job was, no, I never briefed the governor, but my job was to brief the director.
Of course, yeah.
Who then would brief the governor, but in order to do that, I had to go to all the CIA and the FBI and all the people that would, and we had connections in Mexico too, and even further.
I was going to ask you that. So, because I imagine you have some ability to do foreign source operations. You don't have to get into the details of that, but that, I imagine, would be the overlap with the federal, right? Because they're doing that all the time. So that's your ability to connect, which seems like it would be a model that every state should have. Obviously, not every state's going to have the resources that Texas have, but it seems to be something that's more relevant today than ever, because the border, and now let's just jump into today, because I think a lot of this experience, even during that period to today, is what led to this.
That's right.
And so so everyone can see what I'm holding here. This is Todd Bensman's first book. It's called America's Covert Border War. And so I met Todd right around this period when you were writing this, and then you published it, and we've covered it before. But what really caught my attention to this book wasn't just the SIAs, because I had heard about it. I hadn't really dabbled much in it. But was more than anything is you covered that there's this secret war happening along the border. It's been happening for a long time. This kind of post 9/11 environment where there are spooks, spies, secret squirrels, and basically there's illicit actors, everything from criminals to terrorists, that are figuring out how to work the border, right? So take us into how all that came into this book that you posted. And was this 2019?
2021.
Oh, wow, was that recent? Okay.
Right.
2021.
Yeah. So, I mean, eventually I did DHS sponsored me to get another master's degree. I had one in journalism from University of Missouri, but now I'm in the intel business. So I figured I needed so I did a thesis on, based on public records. Mm-hmm. Even though I was working on this in my day job, we had people, like my whole team was working on this. We were part of the Covert Border War. There was a community of people across military, intelligence, the IC, and just a regular intelligence community, DIA, ICE, CBP. Everybody had a piece of this thing, and we were part of it. And so I knew that there were these things happening, and about when I left the state in 2018 to take my job with Center for Immigration Studies, which took notice of my thesis on SIAs, which is how I ended up with them. Mm-hmm. I did a panel with them, and then they were like, "Wow, that's a good thesis. How would you like use that?" But one of the things that they said is, we'd like you to write a book on this stuff. And I wasn't really I guess I was gonna try to do it. I didn't really have a time, but then Donald Trump came out and said, God, there's terrorists coming in with these caravans.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
And the entire world of media and punditry just laughed at it. Laughed at it.
Do you remember, I think it was in a debate when he started talking about coyotes and nobody knew what he meant. They thought he actually meant the animal. You remember this?
Yeah.
And so I remember hearing that, and anyone that's done anything in Mexico knows what a coyote is, right? But apparently, like, there's a broad population, the most of the population, I think, hadn't heard of these terms, hadn't heard of SIAs, hadn't heard of extracontinental migrants, haven't heard of coyotes. And at that point, I realized that and this is where I think really your book really illuminated, because I hadn't seen or hadn't read anyone that captured this kind of covert war that was taking place, where there's a common knowledge about how terrorists are permeating the border. And it's not even a debate at this point among IC folks and law enforcement and even defense, because DOD has an arm in a lot of this as well. But in the general public, maybe in the even more the legacy media, it was almost like they never heard of it before.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember when the Trump controversy blew up, when he said, there's terrorists and bad guys coming in with the caravans, I got pissed off. I mean, I remember seeing on CNN or something, special interest aliens, they were doing this whole fact, here's what the story is with that. And I remember just going, I can't believe this is on the media like this.
Yeah,
but in a way where they're debunking what we were doing.
For more than 10 years.
For years.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't, it pissed me off, honestly.
I get it.
It's just like, nobody knows what happened here. When 9/11 happened and in the years following that, there were huge, breakout investigative pieces about programs that we did, rendition, waterboarding, all these programs that we did that won Pulitzer Prizes for the journalists that broke the stories about the programs. But these programs never got written about. And I thought, it's time why not write a book exposing the programs and show that this is not BS. What Trump said was absolutely, he was briefed.
Yeah, of course.
He didn't just come up with
that.
He got briefings. He got presidential briefings in the situation room or whatever on what was going on there. And I was fresh out.
Yeah.
And I knew what we were doing and what was going on. And I knew what he was saying was absolutely true. So that was really the catalyst for me to just say, I am totally going to write that book.
Yeah.
I'll base a chunk of it on my open source thesis that I did. I'll base it. There's a lot in that book where I go right up to the edge of where I think I'm allowed to be,
in terms of classified information and classified programs.
I never crossed it.
Did it have to go through Texas Department of Public Safety to do like a review?
I offered it to them and they said, we don't have a policy about that. So the answer is no, but I did offer. I said, because I'm going to be talking about things that I did.
Yeah.
And they were like, we trust that you're not going to,
like leak something that's
you're not going to,
sources and methods.
Screw anything. Although I did get in trouble with the DIA for talking about what we were doing together.
Everybody gets in trouble with the DIA. So
got mad.
Yeah.
They got mad at me.
So I wanted to. So I feel like that's kind of how me and you connected, because we share the same experience in many respects. I'm not as much on the border. You've done a lot more than I have. I also spent most of my time in the Middle East as a Marine. But the interesting thing about this is that 2018, that's my foray also into the border, because I was in Guatemala when the caravans happened, and they formed from Honduras, and they went. I remember this kind of very vividly because it was 180 Hondurans in October 12th, and then October 20th, 8 days later, it was 7,000. And anyone with a common sense knows that that's not organic. That doesn't just happen. Like, you don't just wake up one day and start migrating in the thousands, like the bad food, bad weather, like no war, no natural disaster. And I remember President Trump saying that he actually said there's Middle Easterners in this, and everybody ridiculed him. The all international press went on him. And I was in Guatemala, and we I've been writing a report about this, but the interesting thing was, the extracontinentals or the SIAs, they were traveling behind the caravan. They were traveling in vehicles. And then there's like a logistical network here that's moving them. And that's why they didn't see them, because they're in the main body. They're with all the migrants in the shelters and stuff. Like, we don't see any Middle Easterners. I was like, do you think a terrorist is just going to present himself and say, hello, my name is Mr. Al-Qaeda. I'm here, part of this caravan. And I thought it was like very sloppy journalism for many people to not try to figure out the logistics, because it starts with the premise that this is not organic, because you don't just go from 180 to 7,000. And then the next logical question is, who's creating the logistics, right? And so I think that dawned on me that there's a weaponized aspect of this migration. And it seems like that dawned on you, that, and more than that pissed you off, because it kind of discredited the work you've been doing for your whole career, saying I've been looking at this for a decade or more, 2 decades, and this is taking place. And I think that in many respects woke up America to the fact that, the media doesn't have this right, that they're not looking at this seriously, and it's going to take other, I wouldn't even call them journalists, just other reporting from experts, from other journalists, from other places that aren't from the legacy media, that are going to have to break the story open.
I mean, I kind of feel like the onslaught of media and punditry that happened at that point actually left the country thinking that it was a myth. I don't think that it. I mean, there might have been people who were
but like people like me and you, like others.
Right.
No, you're right. Like the narrative was strong.
Yeah.
And like I remember I ended up doing something with Fox News, and Catherine Herridge, who's a good reporter now with CBS, but within Fox News, she put a good story up. But it was like one story. There's like another here, 2, 3 here. But there's like hundreds of stories about the humanitarian crisis, the cruel governments. No, you're 100% right. The narrative, we didn't win the narrative battle on that. The narrative battle was lost. But I felt like it woke a lot of people up. Like, I'll just use myself as an example. I wasn't 100% focused on the border. I'm on Latin America, so I'm focused on Latin America.
Right, sure.
But I was like, okay, I need to start looking at everything that's happening in the region that I pay attention to and how that's affecting the southern border. You're a border guy, and you've been doing the border for a long time, and you've done international affairs. But you're probably like, I know what's going on, and I need to start to document this. And then even going further into Latin America and figuring out what's going on, which you've already spent time there. Talk us a little bit about your time, because I want to jump a little bit into Hezbollah, because that's another thing that we have in common. We both looked at Hezbollah networks in Latin America. And I remember one of your early pieces, and this was pre America's Covert Border War, the work that you did in Nicaragua about Iran.
That was back in 2007. I managed to get Hearst to send me down to Managua, and that was a pretty good adventure. But from my Dallas days covering terrorism is where I first kind of I had a familiarity with Hez. We had cases. I'd written about them. The impetus there was the election of Daniel Ortega.
Yeah, 2007.
And that next to him at his inauguration was Ahmadinejad.
I remember, yeah.
And then Ahmadinejad was making promises to Ortega that if you let us, we're going to have very close relations. And we're going to build a dry canal from Monkey Point, from the Caribbean to the Pacific. Yeah. And we're going to invest all this money, and you're going to do great, and it's going to be a great partnership. And I looked at that, remembering all I knew about Argentina and the tri-border region, and I was like, this is a great story. And I just sat there for a while waiting for somebody to come in and go, wait, what? What is Iran doing? That's close.
Yeah.
That's, people were thinking Chavez.
Yeah.
And lots of stories, lots of coverage,
Venezuela.
Lots of attention and analysis about Chavez and his relationship with Iran. But here we're now a couple borders away.
Yeah.
And you've got them coming in, almost kind of waiting for somebody to do something, and nobody did. Mm-hmm. So I just pitched it, and I said, hey, just send me down there. This is, here's why it's important.
You went to Managua.
Yeah. So, I went down there, and I was trying to find the Iranian consulate, and I found it without.
That was before trouble. They had the embassy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They had a compound there.
Yeah.
And you could see it was gated. It had a big, tall metal gate all around. It had a squad of Nicaraguan soldiers out front. And you could see the tip of the Iranian flag just poking up above the top there. And I thought, well, the thing to do here is to knock the gate and try to get an interview with the ambassador.
How did that go?
Yeah, it didn't go. So they were very polite. I would knock on the gate, and then the little sliding thing would come open, and I would explain who I was and ask for the ambassador to meet me and receive me. And they were very polite. He absolutely wants to meet you, but today's not a good day. Come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it went like that for 3 or 4 days. And finally I realized it's not going to happen.
He's always out at lunch.
Right. So I figured, well, I might as well get some photos of this place. And I climbed up on the rooftop of a neighboring business with a telephoto lens. And I'm on the top and I'm just shooting the entire interior of this place to the extent that I could. And then a couple days later, I went back and tried it one more time before I went out to Monkey Point and on the coasts and did more report. I was in there probably for a couple weeks, but one of the Nicaraguan soldiers who I'd kind of gotten friendly with gave me his phone number, his cell phone number, the ambassador. So I called him. He was furious. How did you get this telephone number? And then one of those kind of things. It's just extremely angry and upset that I'd done that. Yeah, I did a big piece on Iran and Nicaragua that I think is to this day the only piece.
Yeah, I mean,
Nobody ever did a piece on it.
Iran's presence in Managua, Nicaragua has grown. More recently, I think, want to say last year, it might have been a little bit before. So you're familiar with the Army attack in 1994. So one of the individuals, or there's others, but one of the individuals that's been accused of being an orchestrator of that attack, of Iranian official, he was from the IRGC back then. He's now a vice president of Iran. He's the vice president for economy. And he, going back to Ortega in inaugurations, Ortega's been elected now, I think, for the 3rd time, if not the 4th time, in an illegitimate election. Now he, instead of Ahmadinejad, who's out of power now in Iran, Moshe Reza is his name. Moshe Reza was sitting next to Daniel Ortega in his most recent "quote unquote" inauguration. So a lot has changed, but at the same time, not much has changed. Right, so it's still the same thing. But yeah, no, Iran's very much entrenched in Nicaragua. But let's morph this over to Hezbollah because there's a lot of reporting now. With the war against Israel, with what's happened in Gaza. Hamas, but I think everyone that's in the counterterrorism community knows that the big threat there is Hezbollah, right? Hamas is, clearly they're a terrorist group. They've shown that they can create a lot of carnage in a very brutal manner. But Hezbollah is even more than a terrorist group in many respects. They are a terrorist group, but they're also like a mafia, right? They're dealing in organized crime. They have money laundering apparatus. Obviously, they have a political party and they have some social movement in Lebanon, but Lebanon's a disaster right now. But Hezbollah is this kind of big, and I guess the best way to put them is they're like the special forces of Iran, right? They have Iran's abilities to advance in Nicaragua and other places is really incumbent on Hezbollah. Take us through your journey of Hezbollah. How did you? I'm sure back in your journalist days you were looking at it. I'm sure you were looking at it also when you were in as an intel manager in the Texas Department of Public Safety. You mentioned Hezbollah in your book, in America's Covert Border War. Give us your journey a little bit through Hezbollah and how you see it today.
Well, I think Hezbollah is the most dangerous U.S. designated terrorist group in the world.
Yeah,
they're the most dangerous to us directly and the homeland, but also to all of our interests and all of our allies because the way they've structured themselves so deviously, really, and from their point of view, cleverly.
Yeah.
They have, obviously, you've written about this a lot. I've written about it a lot. I write about Hezbollah all the time because I regard them as, one of the foremost global threats.
Yeah.
They're just, and they are capable. They are willing. They're ideological, and they're run by, they're essentially a state actor.
Yeah.
That is, their modus operandi is to permeate operatives throughout Latin America.
Yeah.
as you know, and you're probably half of most everybody who's watching this. They're watching your podcast. They know this, but maybe what people know less about Hezbollah is, well, let me tell you about the journey first. I mean, when I was with DPS, Texas DPS, on an intel basis, our troopers started pulling over guys driving just auction purchased cars.
Yeah.
And they were watch listed. And the same guys, and when one of our troopers pulls over a watch listed guy, it flags and comes straight to me.
Yeah.
And so we started noticing the same guys are buying cars at auction, and they're getting speeding tickets because they're rushing down to the Galveston Island, to our ports in the port of Houston to put them on barges for Benin, Africa. And they're shipping them left and right out of Texas. It turns out that there's this massive DEA case.
Yeah, Cassandra. Yeah.
It's Operation Cassandra. Yeah. Well, we recognized that we had patterns in individuals, and we opened intel cases on them.
Okay.
And got involved in Operation Cassandra in a deep way. The DEA was, and my whole team was on this, and the DEA was only able, because of the prosecutors, and this was during Obama, they had to cut it off at a certain level of activity. And what that was, we all know now, is it was a massive intercontinental money laundering operation run by Hezbollah. Yeah. Moving vehicles, wired money coming in. We got we know all about the wired money and how much and everything. Being stored in the form of automobiles, shipped to Africa and resold in Europe. And then the money going ultimately to Lebanon, back to the origin. But it was this huge circular thing. They busted a bunch of guys. We were involved in that. And then, that
I think to this day is one of the biggest trade-based money laundering cases in history.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. And it's still going on.
Yeah,
They never rolled them all up. They couldn't. They didn't have the bandwidth to do it. What we were trying to do was state charges on the lower level guys. And I won't talk too much more about that, but I did have direct experience with Hezbollah activities here, but more so, every FBI office that I dealt with had a Hezbollah team. All they did out of Houston, Dallas, and I'm not going to say too much more about that either, except that I was privy to their activities.
Yeah. So you got privy to the fact that Hezbollah is the top of the top. They're the tier one. They're a tier one threat that really the counterterrorism community knows that when Hezbollah is going to engage in something, it means serious business, and we have to be very vigilant of that. But take that now to the border, to the work that you're doing now, because now, and we haven't got into your second book yet, but essentially, after you publish your first book, the second book is really the Biden's border crisis, right? It's what we turned at. We actually did a webinar once about that. So why would you call it Biden's border crisis? Obviously, the last, 3 years, has been unprecedented in numbers of encounters and apprehensions. Nothing, I kind of want to just ask you, did you ever fathom that this was going to be this high, like the numbers were going to get this bad? And then just take us to a little bit about where you see the border crisis today, and then how does Hezbollah fit into it, given all that's going on in the Middle East?
Sure. That's a big question, the way you posed it, but let me put it this way, that, we've always had spikes and peaks and things that would draw people in larger numbers than normal into the across the border. But in 2019, 2018, during the Democratic campaigns, there was this huge reaction against Trump, as especially his central campaign promises, which was all about illegal immigration, right? That was his thing. Let's build a big, beautiful wall and all that. There's a reaction against that, powerful reaction on the left for that. And so as a result, every presidential candidate in the Democratic primaries was out there on the campaign stump, talking about how they were going to welcome all immigrants. They didn't distinguish between illegal or legal. They just said, we are a nation of immigrants. We are not going to detain people like he did. We are not going to deport people like he did. We're going to give free health care. Remember everybody raise your hands if you're going to give free health care. 15 candidates, all of them. And if you read Elizabeth Warren's immigration policy and all of their immigration policies read the same.
It's basically an open border policy consensus here.
They said out loud on international debate stages that were televised around Latin America. Mm-hmm. So I'm down in Tapachula in February of 2020.
It's on the Mexico-Guatemala border.
Yeah, just 30 clicks north. I've spent a lot of time in Tapachula. The first time I went to Tapachula was in 2007 for the SIA series, and they're on these the inner tubes. I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Now everybody goes there. I'm like, take a picture of me on one of these inner tubes. This is cool.
There's a lot of contraband that goes back and forth with Tucumán, right? With Guatemala.
Yeah, right. Tucumán.
No, you're talking about how the Democrats were creating this open border narrative, and you're in Tapachula hearing about all this.
I go down to Tapachula to do a different story about the Mexican National Guard deployment.
Of course, yeah.
And how it was working so well. Mm-hmm. And, Trump was claiming success, and it seemed like there was a lot, the numbers were way down. So I went down there thinking that there'd be nobody there. The Mexicans were bottling them up. We're deporting them back to Honduras on buses. They were air flighting them out. The Mexicans were getting rid of So I go down there, and my very first day there are throngs pouring over the border, throngs coming in. I'm like, why are you people coming? They've remained in Mexico. Title 42 hadn't happened. The pandemic was the next month or two away. But they were pouring over. And when I asked them why, they said, because one of those Democrats is going to win.
Oh, they knew.
And they're going to let us in. And we're going to go get position now and then wait and be there on the day of that when one of them wins. Now, at that time, Biden had not been nominated. But to them, it didn't matter which of them got nominated.
All 15 had the same policy.
All 15 had the same policy. They were reversing everything the Orange Man did and letting everybody in. So I wrote a big piece about it. It's like, wow, this was because it was a surprise. And from that point on, I knew that we were going to have a massive influx on Inauguration Day. It was obvious. I had interviewed tons of them all week long or for 10 days. I went back subsequent to that, and sure enough, and I found it again. They're all pouring in. They're waiting. They're coming into the northern cities. They're waiting for a Democrat to win. And then when Biden was nominated, they were saying the same thing. Biden's going to win. All the polls are showing. They're smart. Migrants are smart.
They're like they picked it better than probably a lot of poll experts.
They did. They knew what was going to happen, and or at least it was enough of a percentage chance that they were willing to gamble to wait for a few months. I remember in November or October of 2020, I wrote a story called "The Biden Effect," where I predicted that there was going to be a mass migration crisis on an order that nobody has ever seen before.
Okay.
It was obvious. And so after the election, I went down there and they were pouring in. It was
like days after the election.
Days after the election, it was just.
Even with the controversy of, during the election, there was lawsuits and this.
Yeah, it didn't matter because on Inauguration Day, they switched off all those policies.
Yeah.
And they turned on some new ones. That took advantage of something that the Mexican government did secretly, which was to pass a law 48 hours after the American election that required the Mexican INM, the Immigration Service, to release all family units from all 58 detention centers, but not until 60 days later, so that the transition period, there was 10 days left of Trump.
Okay.
They passed it was not Calderon. It was Lopez Obrador's policy, Morena.
The political party, yeah.
Those are the guys that did it.
Yeah.
They passed this. They didn't say a word to anybody. There was no media at all. The gates opened 60 days after the U.S. election, and thousands of family groups poured out and headed straight for the border and were there waiting. They had 10 days to wait. And on Inauguration Day, the Biden administration said, we are going to open exemptions in Title 42, because that was in place at that point, for the family groups. It just so happened they were there. So
a lot of coincidences.
Yeah, there's no coincidence. That was to me, it was, but the point is that that's why I call it Biden's
border crisis,
because the numbers went like this into the ionosphere from that point on.
Yeah, I remember you saw it. January numbers were high. February, I'm talking about 2021. January, February, March. It was just like it kept climbing, and every month was like a record-breaking month.
Until by the end of the year, it was the most in U.S. history.
Until the next year.
Until the next year, and then that was the most, and then this year is the most in U.S. history, and it's just stair-stepping escalation in the millions and millions of people. It's absolutely astounding what they did, and it wasn't bad policy or failed policy. It was purposeful.
By design.
It was designed by smart people, lawyers, political appointees, people that knew exactly what had to be done in order to bring in the most people possible within the confines of Title 42 until they could get rid of Title 42, and then it was everyone.
Let me ask you a question. So what would you believe is the motivation behind the Biden administration's by design border policies to bring in mass migration into the United States? Is it a subversive effort because of the way the administration maybe co-opted? Is it just failed ideology or like kind of a bad ideology that tends to think that open borders is a good thing and that we need to just integrate the world? What do you think is the motive behind all this?
So I dedicate a long, drawn-out chapter to this, chapter 4, to the question of like, why did they do this? Who did this? And why did they do that? And the quick summary is that these are ideologues that they brought into DHS, State Department, all the agencies of DHS, border agencies, and the White House advisor, the Domestic Policy Council. All of those were filled with people. They were filled with people who came directly from the NGO, the constellation of very, very far left NGOs, open borders NGOs that profit by the head.
Okay.
Right? They often get contracts, government contracts that they get, donations, look how we've helped the little children and that sort of thing. And the families, these poor families.
Just an industry.
It's an industry like the defense industry.
Yeah, like what do you call it? The immigration or the migrant industrial complex?
That's what I call it. Yeah. I actually call it the migrant advocacy industrial complex. And, Eisenhower warned about the defense one.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of theories about, they're bringing in voters, the Democratic voters, or there's but these people are really extreme fringe people from a world that most Americans know nothing about.
Yeah.
That mainstream Democratic Party coalition people have always kept in the bottle with the cap screwed on tight. But they unscrewed the cap and they all got out and they took over.
And they went into all the heads of the agencies.
Right. Yeah. Those people are still running the show, the portfolio, the immigration portfolio. And I believe that they're doing it for money. And I do believe that there is an ideology behind this, a really odious kind of ideology that no mainstream Democrat would ever countenance in just a few years ago. Bill Clinton, Obama was called the deporter in chief. No deportation. It's the akin to Nazi Holocaust. No concentration camps. As detention centers. Borderless world. Really extreme stuff that just is nobody would ever take. Just came into it. Rose to power. They rose to power.
So it's in many ways a combination of this open borders ideology that's permeated in once fringe corners of society, academia, maybe some in policy, but then now it's been propelled up to the highest positions of power, combined with this industry, this mega industry that's been created that creates incentives for officials, NGOs, and all kinds of elements to start to make a livelihood out of advocating for open borders. So you take the incentives, you take the ideology, you combine it, and I guess what your book, Overrun, is about is how this is all converged at this time, at this moment, with the Biden administration, which is why we're seeing unprecedented numbers and our borders collapsing.
That's exactly it. And I mean, they have grown filthy, fat rich on the billions of dollars in federal contracts that are no bid contracts that are just being every month being let to these.
You know what I see a lot too, and maybe get your comment on this because it's not something that I really study, but I've observed it, is a lot of lawyers now getting into preparing cases for migrants, whether it's asylum cases, whether it's visas or whatever. But it's basically like, I'm going to equate this, and maybe this might not come out coherent, but hopefully it does. Prior to the housing crisis, you started to see people that were real estate agents that had no business being real estate agents. They barely even had a high school diploma, but they're out there making money, and they're like making good money, flipping houses and having all these real estate deals because the banks were giving loans to people that didn't deserve loans because of the subprimes. So I equate that to now because I'm seeing people that are like not really lawyers or have quasi lawyers or have lawyers in third world countries, and they're coming out and they're saying, we have this great company that's going to advise migrants. And it's a hustle. What I see is a hustle. I say a hustle, and it kind of gives me this sense that this is part of that industry that's growing, and it's not, and for the good lawyers out there or the good professionals out there that actually have been for years trying to help migrants, it's contaminating their industry. It's turning their industry into basically a bunch of hustlers and crooks. I mean, is this real? I mean, I observe it.
Yeah, you could say this is kind of like 2008 before the housing crisis and the meltdown.
Yeah.
Where we are going to be hearing about this for years. Yeah. What happened here? We don't know right today. This is 2008. We don't know what happened yet. That they were bundling, bad mortgage debt and reselling it at premium prices, and everybody's getting rich. Nobody knew, and that Lehman Brothers and all of these companies that were like stalwart American companies all would go belly up over it, and the country almost melted down, et cetera. But that is what's happening. There is now, that's the old journalist in me. I know that, it's kind of the follow the money thing. But the ideology part of it is also fascinating because it's an international ideology. It's fringe, but you can find this all over Europe.
Yeah. You
can find it all over Latin America, and and it's the same, it's like jihad ideology, which we should get back to in a minute, but it's there's not a whole lot of difference between Boko Haram and ISIS in ideology or Hamas. or any of them. They have, global caliphate under Sharia law,
jihadists,
whatever. And so this ideology of no borders, no detention, no laws, no criminalization of, migration, just free flow of kind of a libertarian sort of, as long as they're the ones that are getting to help manage it for a fee. But there is an ideology about it that is kind of a global. You could say they're globalists. I don't go so far as to say that there are puppeteers. I know that a lot of people do say that there are these puppeteers, these like kind of elite. I'm not discounting it. I just don't. I'm not as schooled.
Well, you don't even really have to do that because anyone that knows anything about economics is really just aligning incentives. Once incentives are aligned, people end up just following their incentives, and they create it. And I think of the things that you're saying, the one that really kind of resonates is the fact that there's an industry. And when there's an industry, people are going to look to work, and there's a job, there's money,
a lot of money.
And the funny thing is it's borderline. I mean, I think the financial crisis, housing crisis, is a great metaphor because it should be illicit, but in many respects, it's not, because these NGOs, these lawyers, they're working within the margin of the law. But when the government is not trying to clamp down on that, but is actually incentivizing it, now you're creating this fake bubble, right? Of mass migrant, as you call it, was the migrant advocacy industrial complex, right? I think that's a great way to put it. But let's jump back into the jihadists, because what that does in many respects is it's overrun the U.S. southern border. We don't have the capacity to deal with 10,000 encounters apprehensions per day. I have some of my good friends that were in the Marine Corps with me, and other friends that are now working in CPB or in Border Patrol, and the morale's at an all-time low. They're overworked, they're underpaid. And so I see this kind of like, this is an untenable situation. And now we're starting to hear again about Islamist terrorists, coming through the southern border. I think this year, I don't have the number off the top of my head.
270 as of today, as we're talking. By the time this airs, it'll be 290.
Yeah.
Or something.
So more known watch list terrorists are crossing the southern border than ever before. And that doesn't even get into the gotaways, because I feel like a good percentage of those gotaways are going to be like criminals and terrorists, because you think about with this open border policy, even with that you're going to get let in, you still prefer not to go through the official border crossings. You feel to go through another direction. That can't be a good. I don't think that's a good precedent. How do you see the terrorists exploiting the border today?
Right.
And how is this going to? Where are we going with all that?
So, I was invited to testify before Congress on September 14. One of the subcommittees of Judiciary,
in the House.
Judiciary, in the House. Mm-hmm. And what I testified to is that the counterterrorism programs that are enumerated in my book, America's Covert Border War, and that I worked on as an intelligence official, are not viable anymore. They are gone, and they have been submerged complete for the first time since they were created in a year or two after 9/11. They are, as far as I can tell, and everybody that I know who's still back there, that these are not happening anymore because they are submerged under the volumes of humanity.
Yeah.
And particularly, remember I told you it used to be 3,000 or 4,000 SIAs a year. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the big programs I talk about here is we would go down and the FBI would interview face to face, because they're coming in saying, my name's Mickey Mouse. Mm-hmm. And I don't have an ID or anything, but just believe me, my name's Mickey Mouse, and I was never involved in any of that stuff, terrorism stuff. And that's all we know. We might run a database check on somebody from Syria, but are the Syrians going to have a database that they share with us? Of course not. So we're at zero. We're at square zero with people from most of these countries. So the most important thing that we could do is do an eyeball to eyeball interview for hours and days, if necessary, to find hints of
deception,
and whatever else, problems with their story and where they came from, et cetera. Sometimes they'll just admit, yeah, I was trained as a jihadi, but I'm not into that anymore. Stuff like that. But because of there's good reporting. It's not publicly reported how many SIAs come across now, but the Daily Caller got a leak recently and said reported 75,000 SIAs came in an 8-month period in 2023.
Wow. 75,000.
75,000. If we couldn't even get to 3,000 or 4,000, that tells you that ain't happening. It's just simply not happening.
And SIAs, the whole concept is designed so law enforcement intelligence can basically do additional screening.
Yeah, they're tagged.
Yeah, they're tagged.
They're tagged as being a slightly higher, they're going to get a different treatment. They're not terrorists. That doesn't mean they're terrorists. They could be fleeing terrorists. But the problem is my name's Mickey Mouse. That's the problem.
Yeah. But at those numbers, you can't do that.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it when it was 3,000 a year. We certainly can't do it when it's 75,000 in less than a year. And people are coming in, they're military age people. I've met them. I've met Mauritanians. I've met Senegalese. You name it. I've met all of them. Iraqis, Syrians. And my belief is that when they cross, they're pretty much let through into the interior like any Honduran. They might run some additional classified databases quickly, but there's evidence. I've written each time that this happens, I write about it, that we are screwing up all the stuff that we did. And so, for example, they let loose a Colombian who was on the FBI watch list by accident, and he ended up in Florida, and before they realized it, and they had to do this operation and go track him down and get him. And DHS OIG produced an investigation on that. We could see in the investigation that everybody was too busy processing in the migrants to do their counterterrorism work. There are cases that I've written about where a Yemeni, for example, was caught in Mexico. Mexico's just as busy, and they were a great counterterrorism partner of ours. For years and years, because they don't want somebody crossing through their territory to blow something up on ours so that we shut the border down and there's no remittance money coming.
Of course, yeah.
They have an intrinsic national interest in making sure that they cooperate big time with the U.S. intelligence, and they did. And I laud them, the Mexicans, on their CT in my book.
But do you think it's still like that today?
No.
Yeah.
Because I think the Mexicans are overwhelmed too.
Yeah.
And they're not able. And so there was a Yemeni, for example, who they caught. The FBI, we did our thing. We deported, but he came back and they caught him again. But this time they just cut him loose. Okay. And we don't know whatever happened to that guy. And that's the kind of thing that would never in a million years have happened just a few years ago. It never would have happened, something like that. And there are other cases of just weird releases of people on the FBI watch list, of screw ups like that. And I think that with the numbers that are coming through and the numbers that are terrorists on the FBI watch list, suspected terrorists, the threat is elevated. And I think the bad guys know about it. And the reason I say the bad guys know about it is because we had the benefit of a major FBI investigation and prosecution out of Ohio recently. It just wrapped up in April of 2023. Guy's name is Ahmed Shihab. Okay.
Where's he from?
He's an Iraqi. Okay. He came here he overstayed his tourist visa and applied for asylum and immediately set about trying to import his old buddies from ISIS over through Brazil, through the Darien Gap.
I'm familiar with the case, yeah.
Over the southern border, and he got caught, thank God. But during the investigation, he talked about, I have experience with this. I just brought 2 Hezbollah guys over. There's no more in the court record beyond that, but that we know that Hezbollah would also understand that this is a prime time to bring people over. I've met Lebanese. Lebanese are part of it. They're coming over. Venezuelan Lebanese of Lebanese descent are coming over. We know that as well. People from Nicaragua are flooding the border. People from Venezuela are flooding the border. All of this is just insane. I mean, when in my time, we would just be sphincters tightened up all over the place right now. I'm sure that they are among the people that are there. And so, you know, the thing about Hezbollah, it's not the only time that they've brought people over the border. There was a prosecution, a guy named Karani, and he came in the trunk of a car in Tijuana. That's how he got in.
That,
so
there's interesting, because like the Hezbollah stuff, Hezbollah is multifaceted. You said it best. You said they're the number one threat on the foreign terrorist organization list of designated terrorist organizations. But Hezbollah is very interesting because, you know, as opposed to ISIS and even Al-Qaeda to some level, who very much take credit for, even if they don't commit the attack, if it's just like something that blows up, they're like, we did it. Because they like, you know, it's part of the jihadist message. Hezbollah is not like that, right? They often don't talk about anything. When something blows up and it's Hezbollah, almost nobody knew that it was going to blow up. No one really has any sense of what happened. And more importantly, and this is probably the thing that I've learned tracking Hezbollah networks for a long time now, is they get away with it. They rarely get arrested. They rarely get convicted. The Karani case is an exemption. It's an outlier. And why it's such an important case, because they actually not only prosecuted it, and that case was tied to Latin America, because Karani was coming with some other Hezbollah guys that were operating in the Panama and some other places, Peru, that are part of a network that you're familiar with, and just so the audience makes sure that they're familiar with, called Unit 910, right? Unit 910, or the External Security Organization, or the International Jihad Organization, however you want to call it. But this is the intelligence clandestine arm of Hezbollah that are professionals. They're just as professional as any intelligence agency of the best ones you hear about in the world, including our own in the United States, the CIA, or the Mossad from Israel, or the SVR, or the what used to be the FSB from Russia. These are professionals at the highest levels.
Yeah, I mean, you have to presume that they are, and we know. I was telling you before we started about there were 2 cases in 2017 brought against Unit 910 guys, IJO.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure they call themselves 910 anymore.
That was an FBI designated term.
The Israelis or somebody. Yeah. But we got to call them IJO. But they're clandestine plants. Mm-hmm. They talk about sleeper cells, like, I think there's even some TV shows, sleeper cell or whatever. But these are the real deal. They actually are sleepers, mm-hmm. and they put them in New York, Dearborn, Michigan. LA, New York, California. I mean,
Texas,
Florida, Texas. They're all over the place, and they are salaried, given stipends for healthcare, valued for their U.S. passport, usually, trained to build target lists of people that they can kill around them in their community, usually IDF dual citizens that are or Israeli businessmen, physical infrastructure, U.S. targets, and to stockpile the means by which to carry out attacks against their target list. And they travel. These court cases, there is a pair of them. Ali Karani and a guy named Debek.
Samar al-Debek.
Debek, yeah. And what was really unusual about this is I think the U.S. government wanted the American public to know the extent of the danger here, and they put into the court files FBI 302s, which are the end report of interrogations with your suspects, with very slight redactions, by the way. There's a few little blackened spots on them, but from the 302s, you learn from these court cases just how extensive their training was and their preparation, and they're waiting for an order from either Beirut or Tehran, or Beirut through Tehran, to attack. They are ready to go, and they're all over, as you know, Latin America. I think they just popped one in
Brazil.
There were some in Brazil, and I think they popped one in Peru and
there's
Bolivia.
Bolivia
Caught them there, and
Colombia,
and they're all over the place.
and everything. I think it's like Paraguay, Chile. Well, as far as like arrest, the Peru case is interesting because I actually was an expert witness to that case, and this is like a clear cut Hezbollah Unit 19 IJO operative. He wasn't a logistics guy. He wasn't a financier. He wasn't a facilitator or supporter. He was an operator, intelligence operator who came into Peru. And this case dragged on. And fundamentally, the big weakness, and so he got acquitted. He got convicted of immigration fraud because he had a fake passport, said he was from Sierra Leone. So that he served 6 years in the Peruvian prison because of that. But the real reason why he got off the first time and then the second time was because in Peru, the magistrates and the judges had no idea what Hezbollah was. Like you ask them what Hezbollah is, they're like, what is it? Is that a political party? We think that we Googled it. It looks like it's a political party in Lebanon. I had no clue what that was. And I think that is something that Hezbollah has been a master at kind of, as I was alluding to before, different than ISIS and Al-Qaeda, is being very, very secretive. People know who they are. They're out there. They are actually a political party in Lebanon, but that IJO, the International Jihadist Organization, that clandestine arm, it's almost invisible to me. So when they caught this guy, I'm sitting there like, this is like a golden opportunity. You caught him in the act. That doesn't happen every day. It's very hard to do.
It's like catching a Russian spy during the Cold War.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. And so the case began in 2014. He was arrested. He came in 2013, and it just got adjudicated this year, and unfortunately not guilty. Not guilty of terrorism. But I'm telling you, it wasn't because, I know the case inside and out. It wasn't because of the things the guy had explosives on him. Let me say that very correctly. He had
a room.
Well, he had a hotel and everything. He had an apartment, but he had a residue of chemical substances on his hand that he said was planted on him. He had all kinds of surveillance and reconnaissance footage and of Peruvian infrastructure, roads, airport security, Jewish targets. He had been in contact with specific individuals in neighboring countries that were close to Hezbollah. And also there was a case, this is one many people don't know about, that was in 2014. I think a couple years later, they actually busted in Bolivia, in La Paz, a warehouse full of TNT, like enough to do a major terrorist attack. And very much suspicion that Hamdar, this guy, the guy that was arrested in Peru, his name is Mohammed Ghalam Hamdar, that he was connected to that case. But you're right. They're all over Latin America. They're all over the United States.
That's right. It's a dangerous time to have those guys, and very often it's a dangerous time. When Trump assassinated Soleimani, that was they have not given up.
No, that's not a thing that's gonna go away.
Yeah, they're biding their time. I don't know what they're waiting for, but they certainly could have attacked inside the U.S. now.
No, but I'm gonna end it here because I think where we're gonna end on, and there's a whole other slew of things I want to talk about with NGOs, but we're gonna save that for the next time you come on, because we're kind of in this environment now where more and more people are worried about a potential war with Iran, right? It could be a war between Iran and Israel. It could be a proxy war with Hezbollah, Hamas, and others attacking Israel. But my sense is that people underestimate what Iran can actually do because they're a global actor. They have networks all over the place. And when the balloon goes up and Iran really says, okay, now is the time, all these cases that you've been looking at for your whole career, that I've been looking at for my career, these things is going to become very real. Yeah. And I feel like people don't understand that that's not a Netflix special. That's a reality. That's here. It's present. It's clear. So maybe you could talk just on like a final remarks. What should America prepare for? Because your whole career you spent looking at terrorists, looking at subversive actors, looking at the U.S. southern border. What's going to happen?
Surprise attack. Yeah. This is going to be when they want to, when it blows. When they want to, I think we're going to all be like, oh my God, where did that come from? How did we not know? about these guys that were here, and it'll be one of those. So, I'm not too much of a sky is falling hyperbolic guy. I mean, I think that a lot of the utility of Unit 910, the IGAO, is just to make us feel this way.
Yeah.
To let us know not to go too far with them because they could, as Soleimani once said, we're closer than you think. Mm-hmm. But in the present environment, I don't know when this runs where the war in Israel will be, but my feeling is that the bad guys know about our border. I believe lots of bad guys beyond the 270 that we know of today have crossed in. And maybe a lot of them should be on the watch list, but haven't ever made it to the watch list, but they should be. And for a lot of those guys, even if they're not coming in planning something, they're emotionally connected to the conflict over there. They're just emotionally, people just going off. There was recently in Houston, a Jordanian busted with his weapons, and he's, by the way, Jordanian is probably just another. It's an alternative. He's probably a Palestinian with a Jordanian passport. A lot of them have that, but I think some of these guys might be prone to just popping off one day. Like I've had it with those Israelis and the U.S. support for them. I'm going to get me some Jews. So,
and we're seeing a little bit of that already.
We're starting to see that, right? And I think that the longer this thing goes on, the more of a prospect that is. And if the Iranians get involved on the northern border, if by the time this thing airs, they're actually firing the rockets, and the Israelis have to go in by land, with the tanks and everything to take the launch pads or whatever it is they have to do. That's when the IJO potentially could become a major problem.
Yeah.
And we've got aircraft carriers over there threatening them that if you do something like that, we could get involved militarily. The U.S. military could get involved in that. And anyway, I sort of like maybe chess move a few pieces ahead, but
I think you're 100%. And I think America needs to be prepared that the war is going to come here. It's already coming here. It's coming through the U.S. southern border. This isn't just about just illegal migration. This is a national security issue. This is a border security issue. And I think as President Trump said, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. And so that's very real. And I think now most Americans are now waking up to this because of everything that this second, third order effects of the border. And I think as I've heard other people say before, that the border is now getting, I always say, if you don't have to go to the border comes to you. And now in New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., it's everywhere. But Todd, it's been a pleasure. And I really want to plug your books again. These are two great books, and I just realized that they kind of have the same graphic designer because they look very similar with different colors. But the first book, it's America's Covert Border War, published in 2021, the untold story of the nation's battle to prevent jihadist infiltration, which was timely then, and I think it's even probably more timely now. So. And do you see a resurgence in purchases?
Yeah. Because all my interviews now, everybody wants to know about the terrorists crossing the border with the war over there.
And that's what this book, America's Covert Border War, is really about. It's the untold counterterrorism story of the global war on terror, which was happening on the U.S. southern border.
And it's these programs that I contend are collapsed now, that have elevated the threat.
And that's what this book is about the collapse.
Yes.
Overrun, how Joe Biden unleashed the greatest border crisis in U.S. history and probably one of the biggest border crises in modern history in the world. They can be purchased on Amazon. We're going to put links in the show description. Todd, how can they follow your work, your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on X, Bensman Todd on X. I have a website, toddbensman.com, because I write in a wide variety of publications. They're not all at Center for Immigration Studies. So you can go to toddbensman.com and find all my writings and my congressional testimony, and
And you're a senior fellow at the Center for Immigration
Studies.
So you can follow Todd on X. You could go to his website, download all his writings. Very prolific. You read a lot. You have a lot of Good stuff. Is there another book in the works, another book in the making?
And that last one just about killed me. But, my publisher did send me an email the other day saying, hey, what about a third? And I'm like,
this one just came out this year, right?
Yeah, in late February.
Late February. Todd, it's been a pleasure. I feel like I finally were able to come to your town, to Austin, Texas. We're a little closer to the border, so I feel you get that little bit more of that energy. And we talked about this beginning part of the show. The border is fascinating, and for all its problems and challenges, it's very much like an international and domestic conundrum, right? It blends foreign policy with domestic policy. It's the intersection of illicit and licit.
Yeah.
It's just a very fascinating thing, and I think it just applies to borders all over the world. And I think no one's been covering it as effectively or as prolifically as you have. So keep up the good work.
I always say, people are, I'm asked often, like, how come you're the only one down there? I'm not the only one, but like, we're the regular, because big newspapers have immigration reporters.
Yeah. I think they're doing it more now, but they're just starting now, but they're not doing it as long as you've done it, or really, I think they have to understand what has happened. The history matters. And it's not something like, for many people, the border crisis happened overnight. But it didn't. As you documented well in your books, it's been happening. It's been evolving or devolving, however you want to say it. And I think that your work is going to be increasingly important. And the reason our podcast is called Border Wars isn't just because of the U.S. southern border, but it's actually because I think the conflicts of today and the conflicts of tomorrow are fundamentally issues of national sovereignty. That's what's being challenged. You hear a lot about democracy and democratic backsliding, rise of authoritarianism. But the underpinning of democracy is the nation state, the ability to have an ordered immigration, a border that's secure and enforced, is the concept of having sovereignty.
Yeah, you're so right. And, I'm not aware of any other country in the world that does this.
That accepts so
nobody does this. Also, to my knowledge, no country has ever done it, dating down to ancient times. They had walls and whatever, but this is like, why does the United States have to be the one doing this crazy experiment in, social experiment?
On testing the limits borders. Of national sovereignty. Yeah. Well, Todd, it's been a pleasure to have you. Again, you can follow Todd Bensman on X at his website, toddbensman.com. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the podcast. Follow us on all digital platforms, Amazon, Spotify, and obviously YouTube. And we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.
Subscribe to the Border Wars podcast and visit our website at securefreesociety.org. See you in the next episode.